All righty. We're continuing our series in First Corinthians. And tonight I want to talk about the role of a leader, and I'll talk about who's really in charge and what happens in our lives. For the first 3 chapters of First Corinthians, Paul has said again and again, stop boasting about human leaders. Stop arguing with one another about those leaders. Stop defining yourself by whose fan club you're in. Paul knew that the kind of admiration and adulation that he was seeing or hearing about could only lead nowhere good. He understood the conditional, fickle nature of us, of humans. Because that's what we do. We say things like, "You're our hero." We want to hang on your every word. The only thing we ask in return is that you do all the heavy lifting of discipleship. Let us watch in comfort. That's all we ask. Oh yeah, and we also expect you to be perfect all the time. Now, when it comes to crowds, there's not much difference between being their hero and being their entertainer. Several weeks ago, I used the reference of football. And I think that it's still appropriate here. I keep thinking of the comparison with football fans and their relationship with the team and their attitude towards certain players on the team. When the team wins, these fans will not only share the glory, many times they'll share the credit if you let them. We won the game. We won the division. We're in the playoffs. We're on our way to the Super Bowl. Notice the we. But when the quarterback throws an interception or a linebacker misses a tackle, he's no longer a hero. He's now just an overpaid bum. And when the team loses, the attitude is they let me down because it's their job to make me feel like a winner. When we define our loyalties according to this teacher or that worship leader or this church or that denomination, we can very easily slip into an entertainment kind of mindset. You're the performer. We're the spectators. It's your job to do something brilliant each Sunday. It's our job to sit back and watch. Maybe take some notes while we grade whatever you've got for us. This is the attitude that Paul is warning against. He goes into detail in some of the middle verses in 1 Corinthians chapter 4. Which in my opinion reek of sarcasm somewhat. Okay? Look at 1 Corinthians 4, verses 8 through 10. Now I'm reading these passages, these verses, in the contemporary English version. I just like the way they read better. Okay? It says, "Are you already satisfied? Are you now rich? Have you become kings while we are still nobodies? I wish you were kings, then we could have a share in your kingdom. It seems to me that God has put us apostles in the worst possible place. We're like prisoners on their way to death. Angels and the people of this world just laugh at us. Because of Christ, we are thought of as fools, but Christ has made you wise. We are weak and hated, but you are powerful and respected. And then jump down to verse 14, the very beginning of, or at the first part of that verse. In verse 14, it says, I am not writing to embarrass you. I want to help you. Paul wants them to understand that the Christian life is not about aligning yourself with this group or that group. It's not about participating in certain aspects of a subculture where you read the same books and listen to the same music and use the same phrases in your conversation. The Christian life is about uniting with Jesus Christ in his death and being transformed into his likeness. Not as a spectator in the stands, but as a soldier on the battlefield. Now, we clearly need leaders in our lives. That goes without saying. We simply cannot make this journey called life on our own. But the question is, how will we determine who will be the leaders that we turn to? What will be their role in our everyday lives, and what is our responsibility to those who lead? We never outgrow the need for leadership in at least some area of our lives. So today, as we look at portions of 1 Corinthians chapter 4, I want us to look at how to relate to leaders in every area of our lives, whether it's church or work or personal development, spiritual growth, parenting, marriage, financial management, and on and on and on. These principles that we're going to look at can apply across the board to every aspect of your life. So in order to truly be led while leading, it's up to you to do these three things. Number one, designate for yourself leaders who lead by example. I use the word designate here because it's important to remember that when it comes to being led by others, it's all our choice. You decide which kind of leader you're willing to follow. You determine the criteria. This is necessary because when all is said and done, you're the one who has to live with the outcome. From time to time, you'll encounter people who try to appoint themselves as your advisor or the keeper of your calendar or your boss or maybe even your dictator. And you have to learn to stand your ground in those situations, because a leader is not someone who controls what you do. A leader should be more like a guide. Leaders don't tell you what to do as much as they show you what to do. This is why Paul's words in verse 16 are so significant. Look at 1 Corinthians 4:16. It says, therefore, I urge you to imitate me. Those are pretty strong words. I'll be honest with you. I'm going to go off script here. Those words scare me to death. It scares me to think, when I was a youth minister, and I would read passages like this, I thought, oh, please, Lord, don't let them imitate me. Because I know me. I know my downfalls. I know my shortcomings. I don't want anybody to imitate me. But Paul was able to say that with confidence. Imitate me. At one time or another, we've all had those do as I say, not as I do leaders in our lives. And we know how ineffective those kind of leaders really are. Paul's approach was exactly the opposite. In Philippians 4, verse 9, He said, "You know the teachings I gave you, and you know what you heard me say and saw me do. So follow my example." Now, of course, many of the believers that Paul wrote to had the advantage of truly knowing him personally. So they could actually follow his example in great detail because they had seen firsthand how he had lived his life. Today, we don't have the Apostle Paul personally available to follow, but we do have other people in our lives whose example we can imitate, at least in certain areas. Obviously, you'll never find anyone who's perfect. But when you know someone whose life seems to be working well in a particular area, learn what you can from them in that area of their lives. Do what they do so that you can see the same result for yourself. We also have people in our lives whose example we know not to follow, at least in certain areas. Now, I love my father, but I'm not going to look to my father to find out how to be a good husband, because my father has been married and divorced 7 times. He's not who I look to for that kind of an example. If I want to learn more about being a good husband, I need to look someplace else for an example. It's also important to understand that looking to your leaders as examples to follow means that we're no longer spectators merely watching them. We have to get out on the field of battle with them. We got to get right in there and get dirty. When it becomes your aim to imitate a leader, you find out just how hard it is to do what it is that they do. For a spectator, everything looks easy. Hitting a baseball, throwing a pass, teaching a class, writing a book, making a movie. It all looks easy until you actually try it. And then maybe not so much. That's why Paul says, in effect, follow my example. I'm not just going to tell you how to do it, I'm going to show you how to do it. So follow my example. To master the art of being led while leading, first you have to designate the right kind of leader. The kind of leader who's willing to lead by example. And here's the second step. Develop for yourself a system of accountability. Every person needs to be accountable to someone. It's one of the essential checks and balances that keep us focused on keeping our priorities straight. Paul understood that the letter that he was sending to the Corinthian church wasn't by itself enough. They needed more. They needed a human connection to help them be accountable. Look at verse 17. He says, "This is why I have sent Timothy to you. He is my dearly loved and faithful son in the Lord. He will remind you about my ways in Christ Jesus, just as I teach everywhere in every church." Timothy's role during his visit would be to provide both leadership and accountability. There were a lot of areas where the Corinthian believers needed to improve. Timothy could help them improve by giving them the teaching and guidance that they needed. He could also help them evaluate and measure their progress. Just as you choose whose example you're going to follow, you also choose those to whom you'll be accountable. Occasionally, someone may try to bulldoze their way into your life and assume responsibility for evaluating your progress. As in, I'm making it my job to tell you how you're doing. That kind of an arrangement rarely works out well, for one simple reason. Most often, these individuals who want to hold others accountable aren't themselves accountable to anyone else. They just live their lives like they're in charge of the rest of the world. So what I'm suggesting is to make sure that those to whom you are accountable are themselves accountable to somebody else. Everyone needs to be accountable to someone. Actually, accountability often works best when it's reciprocal. Like, I'll be accountable to you, and you can be accountable to me, kind of a thing. Many of the churches that I've served in, I've developed friendships where I had that kind of an accountability partner. An accountability partner will help you stay faithful to your commitments and help you maintain progress towards your goals. They can help you develop consistency and deal with temptation. And when you fall, they're right there to pick you up and to dust you up and get you back on your feet and going in the right direction again. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. When you're on staff at a church, that's a very difficult thing to establish. You tend not to want to show that kind of weakness, to show your imperfections to anyone in the congregation. It can become detrimental to your position and to your friendship. And I know that from experience. It's one of the reasons that I had to leave a church. Being a guy doesn't help at all. Because men have difficulty with that kind of a relationship, that kind of closeness with another man than women do. That's just the way we're built. Women get together and share their mistakes all the time with another woman. They do. Men don't. Timothy was coming to Corinth not as an apostle, not as a final voice of authority in every aspect of their lives. He was coming as one of them. As a leader, he himself was accountable to Paul. And he was there to help the church grow in their walk in Christ and hold them accountable. So if you want to master the art of being led while leading, develop for yourself a system of accountability. And here's the third step. Demand for yourself measurable results. This is a case where we don't demand results from somebody else, from others. We demand the results from ourselves. We're not sitting in the stands as spectators saying, I want to watch you win this game. We're not sitting in the pew saying, entertain me this morning. Instead, we're on the field of battle. We're evaluating our performance. and we're holding ourselves to a higher standard. We live in a finger-pointing culture these days, where a huge percentage of social media posts can be summed up as, let me tell you what this person or this group of people did wrong. The implication being, notice how much better I am than they are. We live in a culture where people are eager to share their opinions online. We have yet to learn as a society that having an opinion is not the same thing as being informed. And being informed is not the same as being involved. It's not merely enough to say what's on your mind. God expects us to follow through with what we say. Look at verse 20 here in 1 Corinthians 4. Paul said, "For the kingdom of God is not a matter of talk, but of power." So what kind of power are we talking about here? Well, back up. Go to verses 11 through 13. It says, "Up to the present hour, we are both hungry and thirsty. We are poorly clothed, roughly treated, homeless. We labor, working with our own hands. When we are reviled, we bless. When we are persecuted, we endure it. When we are slandered, we respond graciously. Even now, we are like the world's garbage, like the dirt everyone scrapes off their sandals." That's the kind of power that he was talking about. Did you notice that? The power to bless those who curse you. The power to withstand persecution. The power to keep pressing on when the whole world seems like it's against you. There's no amount of talk that can measure up to that kind of power. William Barclay wrote, "Jesus never said, 'By their words you shall know them.' He said, 'By their fruits, by what they do, you shall know them.'" The world is full of talk about Christianity. But one good deed done in the name of Christ is worth 1,000 words. As we submit to the leadership of others and make ourselves accountable to others, and as we also become leaders, we need to ask ourselves, is my Christian life a demonstration of God's power? Am I seeing results in my efforts? Or do I need to back up and try again? If you want to master the art of being led while leading, demand results from yourself in the process. Expect to see God's power at work in your own life. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Paul closed chapter 3 by saying, "All things belong to you." In other words, everything that exists to serve you in the direction of God's holy calling in your life. Whether it's Apollos or the Apostle Peter or even Paul himself, we all belong to you. We're here to serve you. That's what he said. Look at verse 1 here in 1 Corinthians 4. It says, a person should consider us in this way, as servants of Christ and managers of God's mysteries. Our job, he's saying, is to help you grow in your Christian life, in your Christian walk. That's what a leader's role is. It's not that you're here to serve any leader. Leaders are here to serve you. You remember what we used to call politicians? Public servants. Don't know how applicable that is anymore. But that term actually applies to anyone who aspires to lead in any capacity. A public servant. Leaders serve. That's what they do. It's why they're here. To give you an example to follow. To help you hold yourself accountable. To lead you in the direction of recognizing measurable results in your own life. That's what a leader's job is. The rest is up to you. It's not for us to sit in the stands and demand that the leader jump through the right hoops. It's for us to get on the field of the battle and engage ourselves in action. If we have mastered the art of being led, our leaders can then guide us one by one in the path of victory. And in that path of victory, we ourselves will then become the leaders that we need to be for the next generation that comes along. Take out your prayer sheets, if you would.